Well, we are very blessed to have Shel Browder and Steve Mankowski with us. They've spent careers working in historic communities like Williamsburg and Jamestown. Did Jamestown steal you from Williamsburg?
We retired first.
You retired from Williamsburg.
They adopted us.
They adopted us.
That's a good thing. That's a good thing. So these guys at one point were using the setup at the Farm Museum for the Blacksmiths Guild of Central Maryland. And we each year paid an annual fee for one of the members to monitor, and there were 8 forges there. But transportation every day, they were off location. It did have some shelter, but they came up with the idea of doing a little primitive blacksmithing so it could be witnessed. And then Ken and these two put their heads together, and they're going to tell you about the project that they're doing this year. In a year of low enrollment, there are enough students paying for 4 consecutive periods to work with these gentlemen all day outside to make a dovetail chest, and with hardware, and you'll see it.
And Andy hasn't gone home yet.
Yeah, there's one student that's still.
He started Monday and he's been here ever since.
We take shifts to help him out.
So where should we start?
Tell us what we're looking at as far as tools and the progression of your process.
I'll start. So both of us have worked in historic sites, and once you start traveling, doing demonstrations, you need some way to move your stuff. And Steve and I, for years, have worked with bellows and equipment that dates back to the 18th century in style. So this thing started out without the wheels on it. It had 2 front legs and a type of wheel that you know and don't know that you know. It's called a truck. And any little solid Flintstone wheel that's about this big around was called a truck, solid wood. And that was built so it could go in and out of a pickup truck with some ease. And a friend of ours joined us, and he bought these wheels and insisted we put them on it. It does roll really easily. It also added us around 250 pounds to the thing. So it got a lot heavier. But it uses a bellows. The bellows is about 100 years old. It was probably built in St. Louis sometime after 1900. It's an old type of air supply. They're double-chambered bellows. When I pull the handle down, it forces the air from the bottom chamber into the upper chamber, and that's the one that vents into the fire. So I just have to pull it fast enough to keep air in that upper chamber. And if I shut up and you listen, you can hear the valve doors.
And the fire needs air to get hot enough to soften the metal so they can shape it.
So the little clicking sound you hear is actually the valve doors. There's a door in the very bottom, and a door in the middle, and there's 3 of those bottle-shaped boards, if you will, that divide the 2 chambers apart. It's an extremely efficient tool, and the first reference we've seen to it dates to 1565.
Wow.
And a German mining text. It says bellows used by assayers and some smiths. And so that's our justification for building them for Jamestown.
Yeah, which would have been Jamestown. They would have been fairly new technology. But I think the switch over from two smallish single chamber bellows. You're familiar with like a fireplace bellows, which has a single chamber, and so you pull it open and air rushes in, you squeeze it, and it goes out. But you have to fill it back up, so you have puff, puff, puff. When they come up with this, as Shel explained, it's a steady blast from the top chamber, which is being inflated. So it's like having 2 of those stacked on sort of on top of it. So this is less work, more efficient. You're getting more air and doing less work. And it seems to have been adopted very quickly.
Yeah,
It makes sense. All over Europe.
To relate it to musical instruments, is it anything like an accordion?
It's like a bagpipe.
Yeah,
Or a
or bagpipe.
bagpipe.
Yeah, where you're holding an air.
Yep.
Very interesting.
So what we want to do, Shel and I are doing, this one has a smaller bellows, which is in the garage.
Our stuff is very heavy, so we put it away when we're done.
So eventually we want to have 4 or 5 or more stations. Shel built these 2 here, which will have more bellows. So what we want to do is have the students work with this technology. The other thing about this type of blacksmith forge arrangement is that the air from those bellows blows into the side of the fire.
You can
You can see it here. Which is
So-
something that we don't see here much. Blacksmiths here in America today use something completely different. They have air coming in through the bottom. There's a cast iron pot with air coming in through the bottom, and there's usually a crank blower like these squirrel cage blowers over here. So very few blacksmiths in the United States are using this type of arrangement. So we think it's kind of unique to have this technology available for the students to learn on. It's very, very different than what if you're taking a blacksmith class anywhere in this country. They very likely unlikely you're going to be using this type of arrangement. So that's the other plus I think we have with this setup that we're building is we have early technology and also something that we don't see or learn on in the United States today.
And that sort of ties in to Ken, because Ken uses hand tools and we use early types of hand tools. So 3 years ago, we came up with a joint project.
3 years ago.
Yeah, well, it
Everybody
wasn't
plans
supposed to be 3 years ago, but it was 3 years ago.
First of all, we've known each other for over a decade. We created a video about smelting iron ore into an axe. That's how we kind of all got together, and we've been friends ever since. And we were all interested in the same type of old handwork, the same type of technology. So 3 years ago, we were finishing up Thoreau's cabin, and we all decided we were tired of moving a house every summer from my place to here, one piece at a time. So we said, what can we do that's a lot less heavy lifting? And Shel came up with the idea of building a 6-board chest, with the students coming here in the morning and making the hardware, the hinges and the hasp, and in the afternoon they work with me to make the dovetail box.
Steve designed the hinges to go on it. And they're kind of interesting. They're really simple hinges. They're former snipe hinge, but the students have had to learn to create flat surfaces that work in a plane. And I don't know that we've ever done that before.
It's actually for smiths to fit iron to something else, to wood. It actually takes a bit of skill. For instance, vehicles at one time, carriages, wagons, vehicles made of mostly wood had iron fit to them to reinforce them and make them work better. That's some of the most. It took some of the most skilled smiths to do that. To actually have to fit that piece of iron to the piece of wood, which is all hand. So I think for the students to make one of these with the hardware, I think it's quite an accomplishment, especially if you've never done any blacksmithing or woodworking before. So yeah, here's the.
Wow. Oh yeah. With the curve.
Yeah.
The texture is
So
very
they work very well, and they're quite simple, kind of elegant. And,
Yeah.
Have you ever seen some boxes where you open them and it feels like the lid is going to rip off the back? With this design, you don't have that trouble. It'll open all the way down.
Now, do you forge this with a cross-keying hammer like that to
Yeah,
make it flare?
just like you would jewelry.
Yeah.
Yep.
And you
Metal
make
is
your own
metal.
nails.
Metal is metal.
Yeah.
So what Linda's saying, here's the P of the hammer face. And so yeah, we want to spread that material out. Give it more width. We'll start in the middle and just kind of work that peen out, like taking the heel of your hand on a piece of plate.
Is that a 42-ounce machine set?
This one here is probably about 2.5, almost 3 pounds.
Yeah, that's a 3-pounder.
Yeah.
That'll be an heirloom.
Right, of course.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Each student is making one?
Yeah.
Yes. Most of them are making chests. One student is making a pinhole camera. So he made it. You'll see it. He glued it up today.
Yeah, actually. Sure.
Camera obscura.
Yep.
Yeah.
So their hardware is hammered on with nails, handmade nails that are clinched over.
Which the nails seem simple, but neither Steve nor I are willing to teach a student to make nails.
I told them that the hinges that they've made, and they've all made hinges, are easier to make than a nail.
Yep,
And I don't think they understand. But they're going to try. They have an opportunity tomorrow to try their hand at making a nail.
Well, let's say I've been a blacksmith for 20 years, and there are probably 25 smiths in this country that know how to make nails properly by hand. And so these guys are here. I'm like, hey, show me how to make nails again. I used to make them, And I think after about the 15th one, I might have been almost happy with it. So it really is a skill. Now they've made thousands. They can make them in their sleep. But it's a skill that takes a lot of practice to learn.
The other thing we've done with one of the students, Patrick, has come up with a different type of hasp to go on the front. And they're based on these hinges that Steve came up with.
Yeah, so a lot of it, when we're figuring out what to have the students make, we're trying to think of an item that has a number of the same steps in it, you know. So like if you figured out how to do this drawing out and make it, you know, go from square to round and so on, and another part of whatever will have a very similar, you know, process, and maybe with a little more, one more extra added
So
to
you
it.
get to keep practicing.
Yeah, exactly.
And add
So-
something new to
Right.
keep going.
Yeah.
That's
Well,
great teaching.
They're having to balance learning how to use the fire, how to heat the metal properly, how to hit the metal, how to hold the iron, how to remember that a very hot piece of metal looks cold, and you have to think about where you touch it and where you pick it up. So they have all these things going in their head, and they've been hammering out these hinges. It's just been,
These guys have done great.
they've done really well.
they've done it.
The other thing I was thinking about today is that we're approaching changing material in two different ways. So with wood, you very precisely remove wood to get it to fit. And with this stuff, you don't really remove anything. You move the material around. So their brains are working with two different approaches to shaping material
Yeah, it's
to come up
challenging.
with a finished product that functions as a.
Yeah, they can't go to Ken's class and start hammering on the wood. It's not gonna.
But you can. But,
We can, but
Well, that's the funny thing. They're doing all this hard physical labor all morning, and then when they get to me, they have to really concentrate to cut dovetails, because if you move your saw over a quarter of an inch, you've ruined an hour's worth of work. So like, they're almost half exhausted when they get to me. Then they start to focus, and they're doing great.
no.
And do math.
Yes, yes.
Oh.
Geometry,
Measuring.
Yeah.
Math in the middle of the day after this.
You have to do math with some of this too.
Yeah.
Wow.
Well, the inside, you know, how much material do we need to make the inside diameter of that hinge?
Right.
You know, 3/8. And so how do you have to figure that out? So you still
Yeah.
multiply by 3.
It's a simple formula with iron because you have some flexibility.
You teach this blacksmithing during the year out at the farm museum, or do you?
No,
No, we
actually,
don't.
Shel and I are both from Williamsburg, Virginia. We worked down there for many years for Tony Williamsburg. We've been filling up the
Teach there? I mean, workshops to other people.
We tried for years to get Colonial Williamsburg to do real workshops, and they want it done.
But you demonstrate.
No, let me see how to put this.
Done a lot of demonstrations.
Yeah, we've done a lot of demonstration. All the trades work at what they're doing in an environment in which people get to watch and ask questions. But the products you're making are intended for use. So what you have to convince a museum, if you're a working tradesman, is they get twice the value of what you do. People watch and listen to you, and you interpret. At the same time, you're making products that are either used there or sold. So any tradesperson is doubling their job. Of course, it cuts your output in half.
It's challenging to be an apprentice in a shop like that where you're learning a trade, you're learning a hand skill, and you have an instructor, some master showing you how to make whatever, and you've got thousands of people coming in to the shop and asking what you do. There's someone usually assigned to interpreting that hour, so you're not constantly interrupted. But still, there's that constant. It's like if you're learning or doing something and someone keeps coming in the room, even if they're not talking to you or talking to someone else, it's disturbing. It's hard to focus, and it's the most challenging environment in which to learn. And Shel and I both I worked there for 30 years in that environment. Before that, we worked in other living history museums where we had we were learning this trade in front of making mistakes in front of thousands of people. Of course, they don't know that.
You have to learn to control what you say out loud.
Yeah. Particularly with some of the questions they get.
Yeah, there's that. Yes, ma'am.
What piece of metal do you use in making a nail? What does that piece look like?
Yeah.
It's called a nail header.
No, Well,
Isn't that what she means?
you mean the metal that you make the nail from?
Yeah, what is?
Ah.
Well, yeah, when you start.
Nail rod.
Oh.
Yeah, here's. So we start with, and then as for centuries, you have raw materials. Could be iron, and there were suppliers going way back that supplied the smiths with iron. That could be drawn down to various sizes, either hammered down or they had water powered, machinery that could be fed the Bauer that feeds it through like a pasta, like a noodle maker. You run it through and make it small. And then the smith would receive that. You heat that up, and then on the anvil, you hammer a point. You draw it down. You draw the shank of the nail down from that, cut it off, and then we have a tool called a nail header. You have a form that this goes. You break it off into this tool while it's still hot, and then you make with your hammerhead. You hammer. You make the head of the nail.
Well, it's standing up in there.
Yeah, while it's in there. Yeah. Yeah. Well, if you want to come by tomorrow.
Well,
Morning
maybe
or
else we'll-
afternoon. Everybody's really interested. I mean, we're here. If you want one of us to make a nail, we'd be happy to. No, it takes about 30 seconds to make one, so it's not a.
So
But
their
yeah, that's the
students
stock. That's what you start with. So.
are spending about 30 hours. They're spending 2 periods here. And is that about 15 hours during the week?
Yeah, it works out from 9 till quarter to.
Right, so it's about 15
here
hours
earlier.
in that instruction. They're learning to coordinate their understanding of how air ignites the fire and control it while they're working with metal and changing its plane and sometimes direction to create the functional hardware for the chest that they're going to spend about 15 hours making in the afternoon in wood. And these people have dedicated 5 days to do that project under the tutelage of these master craftsmen. In an atmosphere of reduced student enrollment. That's a huge commitment. It's a testament to the excellent reputations these people have for delivering these projects.
And when I started this grow spot, that was kind of my idea, is not to have any modern way of doing something, but to preserve something that's old and done with just hand tools. So all the students get to talk together, they get to listen to our funny stories, or at least we hope they're funny. And everyone gets to communicate, and so when you have a bunch of people working in this environment, you build a little community around it. Whereas if it was all noisy power tools and everyone had hearing protection on, they wouldn't even know who they were working next to. So we start with white pine. These boards came from trees that I had to remove because they were going to fall and destroy my house. And I have a sawmill, and so 3 years ago I cut these woods, and they've been air dried ever since. You can't even buy wood that's this thick. So the students are getting actual full-inch lumber like they used to have when they were making things in the 1800s. And they use hand saws to start with. They cut out to determine the length they want. This student has decided to make a pinhole camera, so they made a short one. And she's making this one here. And what they're doing is making pins and dovetails, and they're matching them so that the corners fit together like this. And that way it requires no metal fasteners. And the first thing they did after they cut the boards of length is with hand tools, with chisels, and then with a rabbet plane, they made this rabbet along the edge. And that's so that the bottom will fit up in here. And tomorrow they're going to drill holes and put wooden pegs in. And so essentially the whole box is held together with wood. There are no metal fasteners for that. And I don't think they come apart too easily because the dovetails won't allow the pieces to pull out on the lengthwise. And this piece gives you an idea of, it shows all the stages that they do first they cut the wood to length, then they make the rabbet here, then they score and mark both sides, lay out the dovetails, then they cut with chisels. These are called stop cuts, and what they do is outline the area that they want to remove. Notice that all the waste pieces are marked, because when you start doing the same repetitious thing over and over, it's real easy to suddenly cut off the wrong piece that you wanted to keep. So they're really keeping a focus on making sure that they remove the material that they want to remove and keep the material that they don't. After you cut this, then we use chisels. That's what they were doing mostly today. You can see where they've knocked out all the pieces to take out for the dovetails and then for the pins on the other side. And then after they do that, a couple other things, the pieces then fit together, and we just clamp them and glue them and then cut the bottom to go in, and then we'll attach the hardware with the nails. They're called clinch nails, so that they fold underneath. They're clinched over so they go in. And they're doing most of this work in these vices that I realized would make their life a whole lot easier, so I made 6 of them about 2 weeks ago. These vices go back to the 1600s. They're called Moxin Vices, and essentially it's a wooden screw and just 2 pieces of wood to clamp the wood together. And when you clamp a piece of wood in there, it doesn't move, and that's the secret to. The secret is also to keep them parallel.
You made these wooden screws.
I made these wooden screws.
How? How do you carve them out?
The screws were made on the lathe, and they actually make, or I could have made, but I didn't have time, so I bought one, a wooden tap and die. And you have the metal tap that makes the threads on the inside of the hole, and then you have the die that essentially turns around and cuts the threads all the way down. Wooden threads have been around for hundreds of years. Cider presses and hops presses and everything were done with wooden screws, some of them this big around. And of course, if you see any old woodworking bench, it usually has a 2-inch wooden screw in it. But this allows them to work with long pieces of wood, and it just doesn't move. So they can do, they've done their clearing the work with the chisels and all the sawing in these.
And the wood on wood, it wouldn't like mar it in any way.
Right, that's the beauty of it. It doesn't make any dents in the wood unless you get a chip in there and
Like metal.
forget about it.
You know,
Well, we also don't like.
Yeah, you don't have to tighten them too hard.
you know, it looks, you know, you mentioned how hard it is to make a nail, something we've all seen, but it looks to fit the dovetailing perfectly together. Is that hard when you go to put it, if it's just a little off, it
Maybe I
can
should,
kind
maybe I
of
should let
force
Renee
it?
answer
You
that.
just, it looks, that looks difficult, the putting,
You
know,
know,
like the
it's
puzzle piece of it.
It's not difficult.
Uh-huh.
What you have to keep doing is double checking that you're putting your saw in the right place. Because if I cut on the wrong side of the line,
Yes,
then I've ruined the whole piece.
yes.
It's too loose if it
But
gets on.
how this works and what's really neat, I tell them the secret to dovetailing is you lay out your dovetails and you cut them down, and that's what these are. And then you take them,
Oh,
we put one end in the vise like that one, and we put this and we block it up so that it rests on the top.
okay.
And then we take our saw and we put down in there and we scratch a line on the end of the board, and that transfers the exact shape of the dovetails, and then we draw our lines down and we're able to cut out the pins. And that's how you fit them together.
Okay.
And the only thing that's hard about it is making sure that you have the right piece. You know, every corner is marked so that you're making sure when you're putting it together that you have the right piece, and that you know how you zone out when you do something over and over and over again? Well, you can't zone out here because it only takes you a second to make a mistake, and then you've ruined a couple hours of work. So they're being very meticulous, they're very slow, and they've been doing great. I mean, that's the first set that got glued up today. And honestly, if you look at these dovetails, they're nice and straight. You know, there's no waviness, there's no tearing out. They've done a great job, just minute, concentrating detail to make these look so good. Have you ever picked up a chisel before?
Not really professionally.
Have you ever picked up a sharp chisel before? Maybe I should say
No,
that.
probably not.
So they're really doing great, and they're going to have, you know, a box that can last, well, I have one that's a couple hundred years old at home. I didn't make it, but
Really?
they'll last a long time. Any questions?
Kudos.
Thank you. One thing I want to say real quickly, just to let you know, Robin Tillery was our Native American flute maker many years ago. And if we could go back, when we go back to 2 weeks here, I'm going to teach Native American flute making with Bobby Littlebear. Bobby is going to be teaching the cultural side of flute making, and I'm going to be teaching the construction, and we're going to be using Native American tools like the crook knife.
Which he made.
And no power tools here.
Wow.
And you can see by the crook knife, I can just take off little hair shavings to shave this white cedar from square to round. So that's our goal for the future, so keep that in mind for future classes.
So they shared a secret with me. They've already got a plan for next year for the quattro mod class. Tell them what it is.
Oh, it's still in development stages, but we're hoping to make a colonial wall cupboard using the same techniques. I don't think we'll have to dovetail, but they'll be making the hardware in the morning, and then we'll be making the cupboard in the afternoon.
And the flute will be the other week.
It'll be another week.
So just to wet your whistle so you know what you're getting into if you sign up for this class.
What we have to figure out, and probably the hardest part of our job in figuring out these classes, is to make something that only takes 5 days. Because if it takes 6 days, nobody's going to finish it, and they won't have the tools or the equipment at home. So.
Or the satisfaction
That's
of
true.
finishing it. Because that's
true.
a big part of what's being done here. You know, a little pat on the back is a big thing. Well, travel with Kibibi and I to West Africa, and you're going to see the tools that her students have been using all week. And when we go back to Rice Gallery, you'll see what a master indigo dye professional has done with the technology that she's going to show us then. Well,
most often in this here America where we are, people think about indigo as an Asian only tradition, and there's so much beauty that comes of it from that direction, right? There's so much beauty. There is shibori, there is, there's so much beauty. Not taking anything away from that. There are also West African dye traditions that are very beautiful, that are very wonderful, that are golden and full of treasures. We have not been talking about them much in this country because indigo has a sensitive history. It has a difficult history. It's very much connected to slavery and enslaved people in this particular country. There was a time that you could trace the trafficking of people, where they were taken from and where they were placed here, because scientists, artisans, talented creatives needed to be the ones to make indigo a profit-making industry in this country. When it got to this country, the artistry was stripped away from it because it was made to produce, to ship out. And so, hence, we don't get to talk about the beauty unless we think about all the way across the Atlantic Ocean, right? That's where the West African dye traditions are. So I think it is partially my responsibility. If you've known me, I've been coming to Common Ground since the very first year. And if you know me, it is Africa that I touch. It is Africa that I do. It is Africa that I lift up. It is important. When I started Sankofa Dance Theater, there was no drum and dance in Baltimore City. Now you see drum and dance. My goal then was to make sure that I elevated the thoughts surrounding the traditions and the techniques of African movement, music, orchestra, and folkways to a place that was equal to a ballet experience, right? Or a theatrical experience, a very professional experience. And I was able to do that over some time. Under the belly of, I'm an old dancer and you just can't dance forever, right? I don't know. There's a friend, I was talking to a friend last night and they told me that I was gonna be like an old fighter. Don't get on the stage, your knees. So, I can't promise that you won't see me on stage. However, what has been just kind of always the underbelly of the traditions that are on stage are the artistry that wraps around the drum, that wraps around the people, that is hanging behind this, right? So every single costume that has been a part of Sankofa Dance Theater since 1989 came through my fingertips in some way, form, or fashion. Whether it had to be me making the fabric, me sourcing the fabric, me going to get the fabric, and lots of those times it was about only being able to find what I needed in West Africa, because it was basically West African dye traditions. In 1996, I was in the Gambia. I was there because I was looking for indigo for a piece that I had in mind. I needed enough for 50 dancers and drummers. I had all this pageantry in mind, and I had been working with one of my godfather, who was back in the day, the artistic director for the National Ballet of Senegal, and he's like, well, Kibibi, you need to go here, and you need to do this, and you need to see these people. Because one of the things that I always also do is uplift the young people, and I want to know where there is training and forward motion for the young people. You find that kind of interweaving right here at Common Ground. We are always just uplifting artistry, but we never do it by leaving behind the youth, right? Because if we leave behind the youth, we'll see those wonderful traditions that we just talked about over there will die. So we are kind of racing against time to make sure things don't disappear.
And on that note, let me share that Kibibi at Jamoke have gotten a Master Learner Grant from the Maryland State Arts Council. I got one with a former student, Shannon Bernier, who is getting her doctorate in chemistry at Johns Hopkins, but happens to have magic metal smithing fingers, and she also plays the trombone, I believe.
It's a big one.
Renaissance woman, going to be working with me.
That's right.
So
we're making sure these traditions continue to exist, right? If you go to the northern part of Nigeria, where said to be the oldest dye pits in West Africa, in Kano, those dye pits are disappearing. They're cracking away, and you'll see pictures of elders sitting beside them. They are tired, and there's nobody to pass the tradition, or not enough people to pass the tradition on, because the young people have to work quick. They can't chisel, they can't go through, they have to work quick because this world requires fast money. So many young folk are turning away from older traditions. I was in Nigeria in 2019, and I was working with an elder just doing traditional indigo technique and practices. And the young people in the arts center where we were working were coming up to me with their phones saying, let me take this picture. We've never seen this before. These are people who are from dye families, right? Had never seen cassava paste as a dye tradition, dye resist technique, which we're talking about here this week, right? Because it is the old ways and it takes a long time. You have to make the cassava paste. You have to use the cassava, then the cassava paste has to cure. That's about 48 hours right there. Then you have to make the indigo vat. That's another 3 days before you can even dip the cloth, if you're talking about moving with. And then we haven't talked about making the dye balls that make the indigo, the indigo vat. We haven't talked about that process. Harvesting the thing and working it in the mortar and pestle and making it dry ball and then letting it cure. That's a process. It's a beautiful process. It's a spiritual process. It's a process that should not be forgotten. But it is also a process that is kind of trickling over through our fingertips. So what I'm doing here is a few things. I want to connect the traditions of indigo to West Africa and uplift that so that as we speak about indigo, we are not only speaking about Shabore, we are speaking about Adire, which is Nigerian dye resist, right? I want that to be like second nature, not one instead of the other, both and that is really important to me. I think that when we do this work, we are actually connecting. It actually is a Sankofa thing. Everybody knows that's the name of my company, but it's everything that I think about. It is, the word Sankofa is really reaching back to move forward. It's using the past to build for the future. It is taking that past, working in the present with an eye on how it's going to continue to be here. In that way, we are a magical portal, right? So no matter what comes out of the vat, for me, it's a magical portal. Now I've cheated a bit this week because I have used organic indigo, but I've used something that will give us a faster result, a more intense result. If you want a dark blue using the dye balls, you might have to dip that fabric up to 15 times. That's dip the fabric, because indigo doesn't permeate the thread, it wraps around the thread. So you dip it, the white fabric in the vat, it comes out green, the air hits it, it begins to turn blue as the air hits it. And after it's turned as blue as it's going to be, if you look at it and it's not dark enough, you go back in that vat. Same thing. Back in that vat. Same thing. And each time it's a bit darker. Each time it's a bit richer, you know? There are many artists who keep a vat around for a very, very, very long time. But an indigo vat, if not cared for properly, will exhaust, can exhaust, and become lighter and lighter and lighter. Because we are moving fast, and I'm kind of cheating it out here at Common Ground, we've already exhausted about, what day are we at? 4? We've already exhausted 4 vats, right? Because we're moving fast. We're not really taking we don't have the time, because we do need to finish in 5 days, the artistry of the vat and the caretaking of the vat. We're looking at what's coming out of the vat. So, before my time goes up, I'm going to say really quickly, we've started with dye resist, and we've kind of done it in 3 ways. We went to the first, Adire is the Yoruba word for dye resist, right? That West African dye technique, dye resist. So, Adire Ileko is the first, historically, right? The first. And it is dye resist made with cassava paste. You know cassava root? You know the thing you eat? Yeah? So you take that thing and you whip it and you whip it and you cook it and you cook it, and it becomes it looks like you could eat it actually. Cassava paste, right? And if I were in Nigeria, I would not be using brushes, I would be using chicken feathers. You have a variety, generally a set of a very small one for tiny detailed work, one that kind of leans to the left so that you can, what way is that? That way, that's all right? That's your left. Left is good. All right. Leans to the left so that you can do those curves that go that way. One that leans to your right, so you have those curves that go that way. One that's broader so that you can fill in larger areas. And then you
little time for rice gallery.
okay, I'm almost finished. Okay. And then you have a straight edge for straight lines. Okay? So we did that. We did a bit of that. And then in the middle you have a dire oniko. A dire oniko is the tying technique. We call it tie dye here, but literally they call it tie and dye. A dire oniko. It is the tie and dye. Traditionally done with raffia. We translate that and we use rubber bands today. And then there is a dire batik, the last one, the most recent dye resist technique done with wax, paraffin wax. And that's what this is. We are working with this foam. This is a brush and this is what's used in Nigeria. Dip it in and it almost acts as a reservoir that keeps hot wax going and you can continue to use it. We're also working with wax stamps. And you see a variety of all those things on the line. Voila! Rice gallery. The only thing I didn't talk about is the de-waxing station. But you know what? If you want to know, you have to register next year.
Well, we'll talk about the many talents of Thomas Sterner when we're in Wright's Gallery and you're looking at all the things that he does. One of the things that fascinates me is a person who can not only change the scale of their creativity, but they can change the materials involved in creating what they do. They can change the function, the concept, the message that they're giving to the public with what they do. There are three big things to change because Thomas is a master woodworker, as many of you know. A lot of you have taken his woodworking classes, but his new thing are these ginormous big installations that people are snapping up. He's a very busy man. So you will see, and he's a partner of mine at Noma Gallery, so every month we've got to do an installation there. But you will see a bunch of photographs of his larger recent installations in addition to some of the smaller handwork. And he's a leader in making new, exciting curriculum for Common Ground. This is the first welding class we've ever had in 28 years.
Yay.
Yay.
So yeah, this is the first time I've taught welding, but I've used it a lot in making the big sculptures that I'm making. And it's called Intro to Welding, but we're doing really the entire fabrication process. So we've learned all the welding techniques, but I'm teaching MIG welding. But in order to weld things and create, we had to learn how to cut them and form them. So this is a bit of, we use a lot of electricity here, and it's a bit of controlled chaos in this class, right, students?
Yeah, right.
Sparks are flying. So we have a roll former for making curves. We have a planishing hammer for hammering and forming concave, convex, thinner materials. And we have a plasma cutter in the back of the truck. We have a welder under the table. And we have a student demonstrating how to how to bend wire.
I didn't know anything, I just came.
So we have a good time, and we're learning a lot from start to finish, and hopefully we will finish all our pieces tomorrow. Do you guys want to say anything more?
Wonderful class. You learned
They're great students. It's been a lot of fun.
Yeah.
So hike with us back to McDaniel College Rice Gallery now that we've been in Colonial America and we've been in West Africa. We've been in a metalsmithing workshop here, and let's look at some finished products quickly before the concert. Okay, we're looking at the work of Thomas Sterner, who works in wood, metal, sometimes resin. And every one is sometimes whimsical, but always well designed. Tell us about your work, Tom.
Okay. I started making big public sculptures about 4.5 years ago. And these are, I think, 8 of the last 10. And this big feather I just installed maybe 5 weeks ago in Salisbury.
How much weight is in the ground?
I don't know. I told you a weight, and I think it's much more than what I told you. But it's 10 feet deep and 36 inches in diameter, the footer that holds it up. And the feather weighs something over 1,600 pounds. It's stainless steel. And it's really light looking because it's has a lot of cutouts in it, but it's very see-through. I don't know if anybody can see it from over there. But anyway, I work in steel, but now mostly I work in stainless steel. And here's a stainless steel piece that it's a little bit sharp on the top, but you can look at it, pass it around if you want. The second panel here is wooden pieces mostly. This is polymer. But I have previously taught a class called Opening Doors. This was the motif that I taught, and we used wood tools, and we also use electricity power tools in that class too. Does anybody have any questions? I know we're kind of short on time.
How wide is the horse?
This is 20 feet wide. This is a wood carving that I also just finished. It's in the same facility where the feather is, so this is in there. It's the Eastern Shore, the Salisbury Animal Health Laboratory under the Department of Agriculture. They make sure that the chickens are healthy that you eat, because there's 80 million chickens on the Eastern Shore. And they also service the horse population there. So this is their conference room, this big long wooden piece that I just made.
Did you apply for the commission?
Yeah, that's how I get all of them pretty much. They're called artists and you compete. So you apply and tell them how great you are, and then they say, okay, you can make a proposal, and usually they pay you a little bit of money to give them your idea. And there's 3 or 4 people that I'm competing against, and if they like my idea best, then they say, okay, make it. So that's how and usually like right now I have 3 that are potential. I just gave a proposal to a DC sculpture on Tuesday that I'll find out within the next week. I don't think I'll get that one, but maybe. And then I've made a proposal to the city of Bel Air because they like the Havre de Grace fish. Bel Air and Havre de Grace are close to each other. So that one is not a competition, actually. They contacted me and said if I would make a sculpture for them. So I proposed these birds for a pocket park that they're making. And then, of course, Carroll Creek, we talked about Frederick. Every year they're starting to cycle through the kinetic sculptures, and I've made a proposal for another kinetic sculpture. So the Tree of Life will come out, and this new one will probably go in. I don't have the contract yet, but I've been selected to do it.
Is Kibibi here?
Any questions?
I have a question about this hinge here. How do you do that so it's not big?
They're these small barrel hinges.
Barrel
You
hinge.
drill a hole and they collapse. They're just brass mechanism. Yeah.
How
Since
tall,
Kibibi's not, oh, go ahead.
how tall are the horses?
They're 4 feet. 4 feet tall, 20 feet long.
Wow.
This is 23 feet tall.
Right, well, with the horses, then you had to glue up wood to...
Yeah, it's hung in five sections. There's a couple that are glued together, and then I put wooden splines in the back so that they're nice and strong. And it's just hung on like a French cleat onto the walls.
Are they all Maryland woods?
They're all Maryland woods. Good question. They're all, and I bought them in nearby actually at a sawmill. Carved them.
What species?
Sycamore, cherry, walnut, mulberry, and elm, and butternut.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
Now, did you finish them? Any particular finish?
Yeah,
what
I
did you
use like a sort of a shellac, 2 coats shellac sanded, and then I do a wipe on polyurethane. Yeah, I love oiling, but oil transfers to the wall, and so when you do public work, you have to promise that you won't damage anything. Any other questions? Thank you.
Teaching sculpting flowers and leaves. The French claimed that technique by naming it repoussé, but it existed 2,500 years before that. And basically, you're taking a flat sheet of metal, and with a dabbing tool and a hammer, you're creating a dent. And then you work from the other side with a chisel, and you create a groove. So re in repoussé means the same as repeat, to do it again. So it's a process that's sometimes done in pitch pots, like if it were this big and there was an equestrian clad mounted person jumping their horse over a lawn chasing a fox with a bunch of hounds this big, like Kirk Steve was well known for. It was a very colonial technique. I've Americanized mine, and it's much larger. So I work freely in wooden blocks and sandbags covered with leather and hammers and dabbing tools to create like this simple hubcap of the dogwood over here. That's a belt buckle. So that's what we're doing, and you're going to be very excited to see what my students have done this week. They've really accomplished a lot. In order to do stems, I've thrown in a little diminished diameter forging, a little change of plane and change of direction forging. As you see here, that's the wire work that connects the pieces. And of course, some of them have had to learn how to solder. And I told them, you know, I'm not your solder slave. I'll teach you, but you have to practice so that you can do this. And I'll hold my hand over their hand on the torch. You know, I'll be there just in case, but they're being very brave and they're really creating a lot. So that's what my work is all about. I may have a little more Saturday here. I'm not sure. I'm involved in other places.
All right, so I have 10 minutes. I'm going to talk quickly. The way I like to work, I talked before about understanding the past, the traditions, the history, and not only understanding them, but becoming proficient in the ways of our elders. That is that past that I talk about, whether it be dance, visual arts. For me, it's always art. For many people, it's other things. One of the ways that I consider myself a portal is that I work very much non-traditionally. So yeah, I can design fabric. Yes, I can sew, and I can sew, you know, I can sew clothes and things, but I'm much less likely to design a wedding gown, as people have asked me to do, than I am to work in mixed media collage. I love to work in mixed media collage. It's an opportunity to bring many mediums together and to have them tell their own story just by by what they are. So I do like to blend indigo, which has its own challenging history, with Ankara, West African print fabric, which has another very challenging history. I like to add in cowrie shells. I like to work in soft sculpture. And so that's what you see here, just kind of all of those things kind of coming together. This piece is called Crossing Rivers. A lot of this work, this is some of my more current work, and it's work that kind of inspired through the pandemic, if you will. You know, we were in this dark place, this place of not knowing, but we needed to cross the river, crossing rivers. It symbolizes fertility. It symbolizes forward motion, crossing rivers. The portal, literally, I talk about a portal a lot. So we've got the cowrie shells representing fertility and representing forward motion and representing prosperity. So if we go through this portal and we can weather this storm right here and be reasonable, we're going to find prosperity on the other side. Not necessarily money. It's more than money. It's of our spirit, of our ways of being things. We're going to stop people who have been so horrible and racist and stupid from being that in the future, hopefully. We've got our fingers crossed. Okay, Indigo Magic. This is non-customary in every kind of way. It's that denim that we love here in this America used instead of raffia, instead of hair. That cowrie shell that is about our fertility. It is about our prosperity. It is about, the riches that we have, whether it be finance or otherwise. These are marketplaces. I'm particularly fascinated with marketplaces. Oops, in indigenous, don't knock over the wall. With marketplaces in the indigenous world, if you will, as a crossroads, as a place where there's many kinds of energy. And if you can just seat yourself calmly there, walk through it, there's so much that you can gain. So Sandaga Market and Soumbédioune Market, both of them are in and near Dakar, Senegal. And again, that is traditional indigo. It is indigo paint in the back. It's like a lot of dark on dark, but I was digging it when I was doing it. It has some fabric that I've made myself. It has some fabric that I resourced from Mali, West Africa. It has some Ankara fabric, and that sheen over it is, to protect it. There we go. La la. Get in touch with me. You can find me on social media.
You certainly can. She's been very active as a curator and an artist and a leader in the Baltimore community and has received many awards in addition to the Visual Arts Award from Common Ground on the Hill.
That's
not
right.
just as a director of Sankofa Dance Company, but as the fine artist that she is.
Thank you, Linda. Thank you.